So hello, everybody. This is Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, trying to figure out what the future of smart buildings is all about. Panelists listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you wonder who we are. And just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do post questions, comments, and other chit chat on the Zoom chat. And also, if there are any links on this deck that you need to see, it's also on mondaylive.org. So there you go. So what we are going to be focusing on over the course of August is this sort of statement, understanding smart building owners. And I'm not going to say too much right now. We'll sort of unpack it as we start the discussion, because I think this is an important sort of twist to our conversations. And our normal agenda that starts with news and trends. So with that, Ken, hand it over to you. What's going on in your world?
Thank you very much, Anto. We now have our August issue just online, and the theme is preparing for AHR Expo, and probably wasn't the best month to try preparing for it, but we did get some good dialogue, and a few people responded. Everyone's pretty busy enjoying the summer, and trying to pull brains together was painful. But anyway, what we're trying to do is we're trying to curate the messages our industry wants to take to Atlanta. So I think it builds well on this month's theme, and we need to understand that the messages have changed. And Mark wrote an article for us, and he's called it Since AHR Vegas, and he definitely outlines that our conversations have changed, and he basically outlines the areas in which our conversation has changed. It's a really good read. I think everybody should take a look at that. In basically looking at some of the other topics that we see have to go to AHR Atlanta is obviously the AI and ESGs have got to be sessions that we need to talk to. And also the metaverse is something we need to talk to as well. Not sure what you want to call it. I found this definition that kind of helped me is mentally replace the phrase metaverse in a sentence with cyberspace. 90% of the time it would kind of have the same context. So why are we interested in that? There is a lot of new mediums that are starting to come into the industry. I think one of the ones that's most interesting to us and seems to be farthest ahead and being used is the virtual reality. And I think that's being driven by the fact that we have a lot of expertise trapped in a few minds, and we need to distribute it. And one of the ways we can do that is we can have sort of an Uber tradesperson that goes out to the site and basically finds, goes to the area where he feels the problem is, and then we can add a virtual reality expert that is present with him, seeing what he's seeing, feeling what he's feeling, and asking him to test and poke various places in the system. And starting to see some working models of that. I think there was something like that at Realcomm as well. So we need to kind of make that part of our program. We're still open to any ideas that anybody has of what we should be taking to AHR Atlanta. Back to you, Anton.
Ken, remind me, we have something that we're putting together for the Landmark sessions that we think is a really good crossover. Super. It's not protocol specific, and it's very much in line with what we're doing here. And I was thinking, if we get one of those going, we ought to just take advantage, and maybe we can have that in a couple of different places. Okay, our session, your session, wherever we can find a place to do that, a little panel discussion.
Super.
So,
Okay, there's another
yeah.
thing. I'm hoping to have our new website online before August is over. And in it, we're opening up and we're sort of giving everybody a channel that you get to write on the wall of automated buildings. So I'm hoping that will kind of move forward at the same time. And I would really like folks like obviously we have BACnet and Haystack are supporters, and we would like to have Landmark as a supporter or just as
Yeah.
a reciprocal organization. So
Yeah, not a problem. Happy to do that.
great.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. John.
Yeah, so just haven't been here for a few weeks due to travel and that, but still been trying to watch interesting news items. On one of my trips, I actually had the opportunity to be in a what you would call state-of-the-art office building, and so I thought the top left story was interesting. Companies shelling out for top-tier offices in the age of hybrid work. And the quick summary is, that's what they feel is necessary to get and retain clients, and for those clients to get and retain employees. And so this whole thing that even with hybrid work, the office has to have, very state-of-the-art features, or that many companies are pursuing that. I thought that was interesting. And then the other one is improved indoor air quality. We've talked about this a couple of times over the past 2+ years, and we've had speakers and others say that, people are afraid to learn about their air quality. It might put them at legal risk. There's been a lot of things on it. I thought this commentary about, it's becoming a must-have feature was interesting, because it makes sense to those of us who are involved in running buildings that you'd want to do that. And, as I said, we've discussed over the last 2 years that in some cases we're surprised that owners and operators shy away from it because of the information it might provide. Potentially here is some evidence that there is a trend and people will have to pay attention to it right now in this, if you will, kind of next era of buildings and dealing with building occupancy challenges, et cetera. That's it.
Anto, I'm not sure, but it looks like the chat might not be open to everybody.
Oh, that again. I think Zoom has messed us up. Sorry, I've enabled it. So
Yep, I can see it now.
Okay, sorry. So on my, no, Gina, this is from last week. So I don't think so I didn't hide that. So skip that. So I mentioned a few weeks back, talking about the heat that's going on right now in Europe and in the US, about the Tonga eruption being a potential cause of it. And this sort of came up, and somebody mentioned that typically big eruptions make the world cooler. But in this case, what happened in Tonga is it was an underwater eruption. So a lot of water, something like 300 billion gallons of water, or some astronomical.
I heard it as 59,000 swimming pools.
There you
of
go.
water.
And that increased the humidity in the atmosphere by 10%. They're sort of thinking that is probably has caused a lot of the current heat that's actually not related to other sort of global sort of climate change sort of issues, but the next few years is going to be a major factor to how the climate is. So I thought that was really interesting.
Interesting.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean anything about the underlying sort of trends of climate change or anything else. It's just this has actually just sort of put a big sort of driver in.
No, just that 95% of greenhouse gases is water vapor.
Yeah.
So anything you do to increase water vapor is obviously going to have a significant impact. So.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of other volcanoes are not underwater, so they don't cause this. The big one in Iceland didn't cause this, but the I believe the really big one, the previous one to Tonga, was the one in Krakatoa, and that was also underwater. That also created a lot of warming around the world. So anyway.
Anto, before you go on, I had one verbal one that I wanted to just put out there. Something that's going on in the Lawnmark world right now, the powers that be, historically, currently Renesas and Lawnmark, have just recently are in the process of releasing the protocol stack out completely as shareware. And I'm putting a link into the chat here. You can actually download it on GitHub already. And it's going to become part of Lawnmark's intellectual property. So it'll be open, has a minimal, like an MIT type license, don't sue us kind of thing, and everything else. You're free to use it and port it and do what you will with it. I think they're hoping to encourage more development of new products and so forth. More to come on that. There will be a formal announcement and press release, but we have a kind of a small group here. I figured I'd at least verbally tell you guys and point you in the right direction. And Ken will follow up with Lawnmark will have a press release on that shortly. So yeah.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. Finally, there's a few more pieces of intellectual property that I kind of wish would get out there into the public. That would make the whole thing much easier. And we're working on it piece by piece, but this now means everything is either an open source part of the stack, like the protocol is here now, or an ISO standard, including transceivers and everything else. So much easier to now implement LawnTalk protocol on other processors and so forth. Should help reduce costs and make it a little bit easier to redesign some products where there are part shortages due to supply chain issues and so forth. So
I know we're totally off subject here. Tracy, do you know from a embedded machine, where does the stack fit? Like, is it sort of Arduino size to a Raspberry Pi size to?
Yeah, it would go on Raspberry Pi, no problem at all.
Okay.
You remember the original Neuron chip is actually the equivalent of 3 Intel 8051 microcontrollers. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, I think you can fit this, and I know there's some people, even somebody that's listening in here today, that are looking to put this on some really low cost processors, actually. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this now that we get this out in the hands of some really talented developers.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Watch this space.
Yep.
Great.
That one for you, Anto, as well, was that I saw the Amazon have stopped construction on 6 of their office towers, blaming hybrid work. So there's about 5 of them in Washington State, 1 in Tennessee, and they're saying there's no timeline on when they're going to restart the building activity. So they're blaming hybrid for that. So, the other thing I noticed was that McKinsey did a study and went out on a survey and actually looked at why people are quitting their jobs over the past 12 months. And whilst lack of career development and inadequate compensation are there, about sort of 6th or 7th were lack of workspace flexibility and lack of support for health and well-being. So at least buildings are actually making it into the top 7 or 8 reasons for people leaving jobs.
And starting to see more and more published about some of those people regretting that decision and coming back to more traditional employment too, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. So understanding smart building owners. So what is this all about? So obviously this group's sort of mission over the last 2 years is really trying to understand the dynamics of the industry, the dynamics of data-centric buildings and analytics and all of that kind of those applications. And most of our conversations have been trying to understand the purpose, the objectives of building owners, and trying to tie that in. If you remember the smarter stack, the whole purpose all the way down to the different layers. And it occurred to us in conversations last week. We have a sort of an internal conversation, planning conversations every Wednesday, that's all great if we are trying to sort of explain to people why smart buildings and why data has value. I think one thing we've all sort of discovered is it's an uphill battle to explain that. And so the premise here is that there is a group of building owners that already understand this. They already understand data-centric and smart buildings are good, but they don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to go about it. It's very complex. That's the other part of the conversations that we've had. And they don't. The thesis here is they don't know how to go about making it smart. So what we want to do this month is to actually have that conversation to try and understand this. We are in the process of reaching out to some guests. Obviously, since the end of last week, it was not enough to secure any guests. So over the next a few weeks, we're sure we're going to get some guests to explain to have this conversation. But for today, we're going to sort of open it up to a sort of a brainstorm as to what this sort of concept is all about, trying to identify them and trying to sort of get into the heads of those building owners, getting in the heads of the organization, obviously, as to what motivates them, you know, how are they thinking about it, how are they thinking about sourcing technologies and doing their job. So that's kind of my opener. I'm going to stop the share and open up for conversation. And please, those in the attendees, please do chime in if you have some thoughts or questions on this.
I've been thinking about this since you put that out there a little bit in regard to a lot of the customers that we deal with, which I've mentioned on here before, tend to be a lot of retail kind of building owners. And one of the things I want to put out right away for people to consider is that not all building owners are made equal. And even those who say they understand and support smart buildings, that means something different to everybody. So a lot of our customers, a smart building is something that they can have remote access to and turn lights on and off and change temperatures. And to them, they brag to all their friends about how my restaurant is smart because I can, you know, do it on my phone. And then we try to progress them into understanding that there's a lot more information available there. And one of the things that we found early on when we would talk to building owners is if we generically use the term data, right? Just imagine all the data that you get from your building. Well, come to find out, they envision like databases full of ones and zeros that somebody's running programs or algorithms against to tell them all kinds of interesting insights about their buildings. And that's the part that they don't understand, right? So we've had to kind of keep it really basic and start with, hey, a smart building is as simple as, you know, being connected and you have remote access and can see status of things and are lights on or are lights off, or is the unit running or not running? Or, you know, if the unit's running, what's the supply air temperature? Is it really blowing cold air or not, right? So, you know, they got a hot, cold or hot, cold call, and it's really takes literally a minute for them to get on and see if it's valid or not. So smart means something different to everybody. And sometimes you have to kind of crawl before you walk before you run.
Out of interest, Tracy, with your customers and the specific what you just described, how important is the mobile experience to them in the context of smart?
I would, in a word, I'd say it's very important. That's a big part of it. Okay. We started with, you know, part of our basic system was always an on-premise display, and found out pretty quickly that hardly anyone was using that on-premise display. They were all using their their smartphones, which is different than our intended purpose. Our intended purpose was that people on premise could have control and look at things and so forth. But for the most part, in that retail space, especially fast food, quick serve restaurants, they don't want employees thinking anything about this kind of stuff. They'd rather that it just went on autopilot, and the owners and managers kind of above store management layer are the ones who are looking at this and dealing with it and really utilizing the tool. And on that front, mobile is really convenient and important to them.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of an interesting message I've been promoting with some of my customers recently. I do think that's something that a lot of as we go out to promote technology and stuff, a lot of people miss that mobile is becoming centric to everything that they do. You know, every application, everything what they run, the way I'm sure that the way that most run their retail stores, you know, whatever the services they've got, they're all mobile centric. You know, rarely do they sit down at their PC to do desk-bound stuff.
Yeah.
Not that they won't.
I have a perfect example of that that's a little adjacent to our core business. So I went into a grocery store. My wife was looking for a specific item, and we couldn't find it in that store or any others. So we went to yet another store, and it was a fairly large chain. It was City Market. And immediately the employees, when I went up to ask at customer service, you know, hey, before I spend all kinds of time looking through the store for this, can you tell me, do you have this in stock? Immediately, she pulled out her phone and started looking on her phone. And initially, I thought it was like an in-house app that they were looking for inventory levels. It was the City Market app that you and I can download and utilize, and the employee was using that to check inventory.
So to that, Tracy, I think, you know, a lot with the Instacarts, the DoorDash, and, you know, all of that shopping, you see that a lot too. So I think retailers, especially grocery stores and restaurants, are using a lot of mobile technology for that. So they're getting very comfortable with it. And so, Tracy, I remember it was a few years ago, I had a customer and it was a quick serve restaurant, and probably one of your customers, but everything they did on mobile. So they didn't have thermostats or anything in the restaurant. So all of that was all done by mobile by the manager, and they refused to have any thermostats anywhere in the restaurant because they wanted to control that. And plus it was a cost savings for them not to have to install, although it was, you know, small, but they like controlling the store. So I think they're probably, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but they seem to be a customer that's very, very much, I guess, fluent in mobile technology of controlling building space.
Yeah, our experience has been, it really varies dramatically brand to brand about how sophisticated they are. And to your point, there are some brands that they can ask for something other than normal thermostats. The majority of the brands take what mechanical contractors or, you know, design engineers lay out for them. So if they've got a thermostat out in the dining room space that customers have easy access to, for instance, which is fairly common, they just take it. And then the next level up is a lot of brands now will put the thermostats in the manager's office and just use remote sensors, right? That's probably the most common thing that we bump into. But even those tend to be with the bigger, more sophisticated brands than the smaller, you know, kind of more regionally based. And you know, I can count on kind of one hand the brands I'm talking about when I say sophisticated, right? There are some small brands that are sophisticated, but for the most part, only the big ones really have the wherewithal and the inside resources to kind of understand this part of the business.
Which kind of circles back to your earlier point about there's a scale of people in your market who understand which, back to Anto's title, I think one of the operative words we got the question is, you know, understanding the smart building portfolio guys. So, and so, your examples are kind of interesting to me. Just tying it back to my mobile question. I'm starting to use a metric. I'm starting to wonder if there's a metric of, in my talking to a customer, how much do they have on their phone today that they operate their facilities from, purely on a mobile perspective. So to Gina's point, right, the people who just do remote sensors and everything's on their phone from a thermostat perspective, versus what you said, could they put the master thermostat in the manager's office and put sense? It's the same answer. The difference is the thermostat in the manager's office with sensors is not really smart to me. The guy with the mobile app and sensors, to me, is okay. That guy gets the whole smart concept. He's gone the next step, right?
It's interesting how fast this is progressing too. I need to explain that, because when we started this in that space in a kind of a big way, right, in a production way, not just a onesie twosie way, many of the brands didn't want their restaurants connected to anything cloud, right? Now that's long gone, right? So 10 years went from no way to, well, of course,
But just to interrupt you, don't you think though that transition point was really abrupt, right?
Very abrupt,
right? It wasn't like they gradually did it. They almost all went overnight.
Yeah, it went, somewhere in this 10-year window between 2012, let's say, and today, there is a period of time where it went from no way, why would you ever do that, to, well, of course, everything's going to be cloud-based. And then there's a second interesting kind of flip in the mentality too, and it has to do with mobile access. And initially, no one wanted their employees to use their own phones, to have access to it on their own phones, to have company phones even. And now more and more, everybody has a mobile, even if it's their own device that they're utilizing.
Or in fact, the common model being multiples now, they would have 2 or more,
Yeah.
So are we saying that mobile is a proxy of people's understanding of smart, or is it, hang on, let me ask the second part.
Fair enough.
Or is the mobile thing completely disconnected from what smart actually means? So we can go.
I think you said the right word, which is proxy.
Proxy,
right?
Yes, I like the proxy.
And it's an indicator. It's a stepping stone along the way. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned we kind of walk people through the process of understanding what a smart building is. And sometimes this is over months or even years, by the way. And it starts with, I can change my temperature on my phone, to, how much energy consumption, does this store have compared to my other one in the next town over? And so then they start understanding, I can have energy metrics and do comparisons among my portfolio of assets and locations, right? And then that's when they're starting to really understand there's a difference between a connected building and using the data from your buildings to do things, right? So, but I think the phone is sort of like a sign that to them that, that means that's a smart building. If I can access it some way, somehow, or some of the information, it's a smart building.
I use the same thing, and that's what I was trying to get to earlier, that I think it's a great, I like the word proxy. If I'm talking to someone, I kind of ask them how much do they run their building, not just the stuff, but what else is run on their mobile, and how many of their employees have access to the stuff. And to me, it's become an interesting proxy of where they are in their thinking process as far as the context of smart.
Because what's interesting is that you can actually twist it around and you say, from a system, from a building perspective, a mobile is actually a proxy of a human.
Sure.
Right, because you're going direct to the human as opposed to going to a PC that may or may not have the human in front of them. So it connects the human to the system very, very tightly.
The one thing I want to say too, from where I just went as base level up a little bit just beyond where I was just talking, there is a binary switch that really separates a sophisticated owner from a less sophisticated, and it's night and day, black and white. And you know almost immediately when you're dealing with somebody who's at the next level, right? When they look at, you know, a system that we would put into a retail operation is pretty simplistic and basic, and say, well, what, you know, what do I have access to the data, and can I do some of these analytics and things like that? And one of the telltale signs is if they have facilities people that work for the organization or not, right? Now, I know we've talked about, there's also a trend that, you know, even some of the bigger sophisticated commercial property owners are outsourcing everything and getting rid of their facilities people. But in that case, they at least have somebody that's on contract that understands this. So a lot of the people we deal with don't, you know, their idea of a facilities person is a mechanical contractor that comes every month and changes the filters out, and they call, you know, when something breaks at night. So our world changes dramatically once you hit that point, in my opinion.
So this is great. So we've got two attributes, as it were, of
very bimodal. Yeah.
Any other attributes? I mean, you guys talk to building owners all the time, or maybe not all the time, but what are some of the other sort of signals that you've heard that kind of triggers?
I'll throw the other one out that I was talking to you about, Anto, which I thought was sort of interesting. And I was challenging Anto, and, you know, do we talk about building owners, or is it building owners and managers? You know, is there a thing? And so we kind of had some to and fro. And one of my questions is where does a building owner get, and we've talked about this in the past as a team, well, where does the building owner get his information on possible technologies, innovations, you know, what is available to make his building smart, and, you know, what all the ideas. And we've talked in the past about the dearth of the consultants. They used to be the guys, but they've evaporated and there's nowhere to go. One of the things I'm seeing now is this is an area that, and I'd be interested to get Scott's perspective on this. This is an area where a lot of the building managers, property managers, seem to be stepping in and bringing in technology into their portfolios to help advise and bring forth solutions to the building owner now to say, you know, I've got the stuff that you're looking for, and here are the things, which I don't think existed 5 years ago. For example, property managers were not technology companies 5 years ago.
So how does that different from the second point that Tracy made, that they need to have people? Let me add to that. I have another example that is somewhat related. So we have a new partner who has a platform that can monitor fire system alarms and so forth, fire systems. And they do it in a very passive way, so as not to mess up with UL 864 or anything. But in the building where we are, we own the building, but there's a management, association for the complex of buildings that we're in. And in order for us to do the install of our first little test unit that we wanted to on our own building that we own, we had to get approval from the association management company, and they coordinated with the fire control people to, put the alarms in snooze or turn them off or whatever it was that they did. And when I explained what I was doing, the light bulb went off for this lady, and she said, "Is this something that we can do at all of the buildings?
Right.
Can we put this in other places too? And this is strictly a for-hire building management, that deals with building owner associations kind of a thing. So not so much that they were sophisticated, but a different set of responsibilities and ownership kind of open the window for putting smart technologies and connected buildings into place.
Let's broaden the field. Any other Any other thoughts? That's great, Tracy.
Yeah, so I've got a couple thoughts. When Tracy, on the cloud piece, you said now there's this shift to where cloud's acceptable. Okay, why? Is it to eliminate the on-site servers? Is it to consolidate databases? Is it to be more scalable? What's the motivation?
I'll tell you what my opinion is, and I don't know if everyone will agree. I think the vendors are wearing them down. That there's so much of what they are purchasing these days for their restaurants that is the only way that they can procure it is as a service.
Right.
And it starts with Autodesk. You know, when the plans for the new restaurant, you can't buy Autodesk anymore. You have to subscribe to it, right? And it just every point along the way, someone in there has said, look, we're not selling a CapEx product anymore. You can only purchase this if you do it through an OpEx kind of a model.
Okay.
I think that has done it. That combined
value, there really isn't a value that said, hey, I don't want all these servers that I have to maintain in every building. I'll put my application in the cloud. Yeah.
I think that's there, but
it's also
really more compelling, I think, was that
their understanding of cloud, because they use it. Everybody's using it all the time on their phone for all of their.
And that's the other part of it, right? It's the consumer impact on what happens in our world, right? Everything they do at home, everything that they subscribe to personally, it's all cloud-based. Why wouldn't they expect that to be in their buildings?
So the other point I wanted to raise, or attribute, is, so I have remote access from a mobile device, which is the key thing that Tracy already brought up. But what I'm seeing in the MSI world, and the motivation, a large part of the motivation of the MSI is to come in and integrate all these different systems into what? A single dashboard. So my question to the group, or the concept is, I should be able to not just get the building automation, but my lights and my parking systems and all these other things from a single dashboard.
If I can take on this one, so I'm gonna go back to Tracy's thing about the cloud-based, and I think there's vendors wearing them down, and that's the only option. It's kind of like cable nowadays. Everybody streams everything on TV, but I also think that it's a price point that is relevant to the small to mid-sized building market, and so that has a lot to do with it. I also think that something that's cloud-based is actually is going to be have more cybersecurity and more ability to bring on new technology as they need it. So I think it's going to be automated and updated. And so, Steve, I'm sorry, what was your question again?
About the single dashboard for integrating all the different subsystems, right?
Yeah. So I think this is the interesting thing about owners, and I think that we have a tendency sometimes of thinking what the facility manager needs. And I think there's been a shift to now there are more eyes on the building operation, not just the facility manager. I think there's the energy manager, the sustainability manager, and the finance people that are now looking at it. And so I would have to say that over the last few years, what I have seen is a shift to not necessarily control the building, but to be able to have insight into that building from an enterprise perspective. I want to be able to go here and see all 1,000 of my buildings and how they're operating and the ability to drill down. And I think you're seeing that at the CXO level more than anything, because they want to have those eyes there now on that. And so for that, I think that's become pervasive, but I think that's a different type of person that's looking at that. That's my opinion on it. And I don't think that from that level, the facility manager is too much involved in that, because they're still in that day-to-day, that single building mindset. But that's my opinion.
I'd like to make a differentiation on that point, Steve. I think that the idea of a single source, a single screen piece of control is overrated. I mean, how expensive is it for the janitor to turn his head 5 degrees and look at another screen? That really isn't the issue. The issue is, what can we do with the data? From an analytics standpoint, if I'm collecting data across those screens, it's not necessarily an operating value proposition where I want to look at it. It might be correlation between the different data silos. And I think that what we see is the most sophisticated customers we have a very high level perspective, top down, as to what the value propositions are that they want. So having the customer have a perspective for the value proposition is key, whether it's energy, maintenance, operations, regulatory issues, comfort. And how to drive towards that is not necessarily through an MSI, it's through integration of that data into a platform where the things could be analyzed, rather than a real-time control coming up to a dashboard. Sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, I was going to say something a little bit hybrid of what you just said too, Jim. And I think, again, I'm thinking of it from the standpoint of small, medium-sized buildings and the way that systems are being deployed, which tend to be standalone IoT-centric type systems. And the single dashboard, I would argue, is the screen of your phone, right? If it's an app, if it's got an icon I can open, what's the difference? I click on an icon on the screen up here in the corner, or I have another icon on my phone that I open. And to a lot of owners that we deal with on that kind of that lower end of things, that is their single dashboard. And again, it's not until you get into the little bit more sophisticated owners that understand data sharing and the importance of being able to do that across those different applications.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, Tracy, I'm with you. I think the concept of this, SPOG, single pane of glass, there's an accurate concept of what it's trying to be, but I think a lot of people misinterpret that as saying it's literally a single pane of glass. That's not really what they're asking. They're asking,
not anymore.
Not anymore, and that's a key point. Yes, I think not anymore. That's also changed. I think what they're asking for is there a place, preferably mobile, especially for 90% of my organization, that I can go to see all the data from my building. How I navigate around there is important and not to be minimized, but it doesn't necessarily have to all fall under a single application per se. And I think that's the difference. But so the concept of single pane of glass has changed in the last few years.
So I'm looking at the comments and I'm listening to some of these answers, and I'm wondering is there sort of a progression or a path or a model that says that, I'm looking at the grid connected, the question about the grid connected. So is a smart building grid connected? Well, and John, I thought answered that very well. Should we be looking at owners in terms of maybe a level of sophistication or maturity or something where, we can classify them in a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 kind of a customer? And the thing about that really sort of clicks is, to me, the first step is that connected building, right? Connected can mean a lot of different things to different people, but once you can say to somebody, you have a connected building. Yeah, it might only be their thermostats, but that's a start. Now they get it. And now you can, once you build it, they will come, is always the thing that I keep telling my team. Once we get in there, we'll be able to look for other opportunities to help them save more money, be a little bit more sophisticated. And I'm wondering if we can model this in our marketplace a little bit.
Well, in fact, what you're saying is, are there more proxies than just mobile, right? So having a connected building is one level of a proxy. Doing everything mobile is another whole level of proxy. Yeah, what others are there in the scale?
Yeah, Tracy, you're talking about maturity model, which is a concept that's used lots of places that maybe need that. Absolutely.
I think that's an interesting point about maturity, because we're just going back to Tracy's mobile thing and stuff. I guess that's the bit that people are familiar with. So therefore they're comfortable at looking at all this other stuff that's always been a mystery underneath, and now they can get some data and information about temperatures or whatever else they want to look at, meter readings. But I do think also one of the things we've been seeing is that all the REITs are actually employing really smart people, really know what they want, you know, and they want to be integrated with BIM, and they want the assets tied in. They do want, you know, the meeting rooms and the people counting and all the other stuff, and they want that. But I think they're still missing that final stage of where they're not prepared to actually back it through the contractual chain. They suddenly start stepping back a little because they don't want to, you know, get involved with that. If people are saying, yeah, but we can't implement that because it's in, you know, the mechanical contract versus the electrical, and who's paying for it and stuff like this. And we're at that stage, I think, where they now know what they want to do, a lot of these REITs, but we got to actually somehow have a vehicle for them to actually get what they want. A lot of them are, of course, employing the MSI to act as a consultant to help them with bids, but we're still at that early stage. But when the budget gets cut, guess what? You know, that's one of those things that can be chopped. But I think it is a maturity thing, and I'd like to think that, you know, in a few years' time, just like I was saying earlier on the survey, suddenly it's, you know, buildings and the environment people are working in, it was moving up the chart, and it therefore becomes essential as opposed to optional.
John, I think you've been wanting to say something for a bit.
Yeah. I want to pick up on a couple of comments. I didn't want to interrupt. First of all, you know, I think it would be an overstatement to say everybody's on the cloud. Certainly in our business, we see substantial portion of the customer base who still wants on-premise. For whatever reasons, we can debate the good and bad about the cloud, but there are numerous types of facilities and organizations that are not putting their data out on the cloud. They want it on-premise, managed by their own IT department. So
John, what sort of percentage would that be, you think?
Well, we see a sizable percentage, but that may be somewhat biased because we do offer on-premise. But I'll talk about airports. We're in 4 of them. None of them want their stuff on the cloud. Talk about Department of Defense applications, no cloud, okay, and others. Those are just some examples, and it extends to commercial customers too. So I don't want to overstate for our listeners that everything's on the cloud. The cloud fits a lot of companies very well because they don't have and don't desire to have the IT skills, but it is by no means a blanket approach that everybody's taking, okay? And doesn't mean it's negative. It has to fit, right? Everything has to fit. And I think that's the biggest theme, if I can kind of, you know, kind of congeal some of the conversations today. Nobody wants a smart building. I want to reduce energy. I want to be able to access my thermostats. I need to be able to do this. It's the applications which might be a silo, but as Tracy said, if you're in there, then you can introduce them to the next thing they could do with their connected building, with their, you know, having all of their data aggregated and different things they can do. But I think it's really hard to sell people on the smart building thing because it's vague, it's hard to touch. But a program to bring together my 500 meters so I understand my energy consumption in all my buildings, and I can compare them against rates to maybe save some money without doing anything else, right? That is something that a higher percentage of people might be able to understand than, well, you're going to have smart buildings of all your facilities in order to do that. What I'm going to need to do what? I think that's a big challenge. And of course, that goes against rapid scaling for the things we're talking about, right? If you have to sell every customer on their pet or need, right? How are we going to scale this rapidly, right? The customer starts with metering, maybe 2 years later, they come back and say, let's do X. Wow, that's not the scaling that we believe, and I think, you know, society believes that the transition that we need to make in the built environment.
Yeah, I think you're dead on that. And, you know, listening to you, the thing that came to mind is we need to be careful not to present smart buildings as an all or nothing proposition, right? We're going to do your whole building or nothing at all. What we found is one piece at a time. Just get it in there. If it's meters, do that first. Then they get it, and then they'll start asking you the question. where else can I do something like this?
So continuing on the search of that sort of persona, that profile of that company that sort of gets it, as it were, how critical is the support of the C-suite?
You know, if
In my
facilities-
world, very critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If the facility staff has a budget to go grab all their meters they've already been given, you know, that project may never be visible to the C-suite other than when they do, you know, their reporting and they get a bunch of accolades. And this is part of the challenge, you know, the classic, well, you got to sell to the C-suite. The C-suite guy may not know any or care anything about that, but it's under the remit of the facility staff to get all the meter data, right? So again, blanket statements again, and that's a big part of our challenge is you know, we're selling to so many different personas with so many different budgetary limitations or opportunities that it makes it hard for this industry to scale rapidly.
Yeah,
just to amplify that.
C-suite is 2 positions away from the guy serving the French fries in my world.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Maybe more, right?
Two?
Sometimes not even.
But to amplify John's point, I mean, it kind of comes back to even like what the IoT guy, I find in any organization, there are so many skunkworks projects going on. You know, the metering in the facility is just one, right? The guy doing the water monitoring in the bathrooms is another one. The guy doing the, you know, the indoor air quality probably falls under. They're all going on underneath most of what the C-suite is aware of until they deliver some results and get the accolades per John. So it's not just the smart metering; it's a much wider case.
Well, I think this is leading to why we're seeing these very siloed IoT solutions getting bought. I haven't. There's a thing. Have you considered interoperability? What's that? I just need the thing now.
Right.
And then we come in, or that owner or someone at a higher level comes in. Hey, how come none of this stuff talks together? Right. You didn't ask for it at the beginning, right? If you don't ask for ABS on your car, you don't get it. Well, nowadays you do, but you know what I mean? You got to ask, right? Oh, I really wish I had that option now, right?
And that's the gap we got.
That's the gap we got. Mm-hmm.
So something like ESG that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the last few weeks, which is really a C-suite issue. Right. And we when we were talking about it, that's kind of how we talked about it, is we're trying to understand what it is. I think we're all trying to understand what it is. But that has to almost come from the C-suite.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm. I disagree. So what I've seen in real life in that area, sorry, John.
That's okay. Never happened before on them.
No, really?
Not the first time, not the last time.
So what I've seen is that there are initiatives going on already in the organization. Smart metering, you know, there are some programs and some initiatives that we already talked about that's been transparent to the C-suite. What I see going on at the moment is the C-suite saying, we need to get into ESG. What are we doing already, right? And then they go into the organization and they find all these skunk works and they put a bow and a package on it and go, here's our ESG. Well,
yeah, they claim it as their own, right?
They claim it as their own at that point.
That counts as being an ESG thing driven by the C-suite. It's not really, but they
that's my point.
Hijacked it in a good way.
They've hijacked it is probably a better term. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on the sort of the levels and the C-suite role? And
well, Again, I think it depends on the persona of the owner in what's going on there. You know, I'm thinking about listening to everybody. How will this market evolve over the next 10 or 20 years, right? And part of the challenge is there aren't many companies that are large enough to fully implement let's just generically call it a smart building in a big, sophisticated commercial operation, right? All aspects of it. And so, and then at the same time, we've talked about this a lot historically in this group. Building owners of those kinds of operations tend to default to the bigger companies because it's lower risk and perceived as a safer way to go about doing business, right? But at the same time, everybody else in the world, so there's 5 companies, let's say, that worldwide that could pull this off or be trusted to pull this off. So In the meantime, every other company in this market is trying to find a niche that they can go in and exploit or own or develop and perfect. And that's where the majority of deployments going to come from. And it's going to be one little application at a time in an IoT kind of a way for a very long time, until there's enough in there and somebody's smart enough to say, well, how do I tie all this stuff together? Right? So I think we're going to be living with this for a while, and that's okay. But our first step is, let's get our toe in the door. Let's get something in there first and start the ball rolling, and then let it evolve.
I've always taken the home market as the precursor to what happens in the building market, right? And if you go back in time from, people had PCs at home well before we had PCs in the office, in the building, and in the facility side and stuff, right? And so if you equate that with what's happening in the smart home market, it's a mess, right? I mean, for any of you who put smart home stuff in your house, it's a whole bunch of point solutions, right? I've got one for one set of lights, a different thing for another set of lights. I've got Amazon for this, Alexa, that drives my wife nuts, right? And so the home market is still going through that, I'm buying point solutions because, this thing solves my pool pump problem really, really well, but it doesn't integrate with anything. It sits all by itself and doesn't integrate to anything, which is really annoying. I see those same things. We're in that same space in our space, but eventually what happens in the home market, I think, will give us a precursor to what's going to happen in our space in a lot of ways.
You said last week, Anna, was that, and when we were talking around this, but it's easy to implement now. Anybody,
right.
your mother, your aunt, your uncle can all actually implement this stuff. Yeah, they may suddenly go, actually, I want to do it all around Google, I want to do it around Amazon. They kind of make that decision themselves eventually, or some other wireless solution, but it is easy. It is easy, and it's no longer difficult, which is something that we still have got to overcome a little bit. What we do is still a little bit complicated, too complicated for most.
Right.
Okay, as we wrap up, anybody want to wrap this thing up, this conversation?
I'm making a point that, well, what we're doing here a lot is talking to ourselves. And I think we have to package some of this conversation into something that is coherent and push it out to the public and get people in the public writing about it, the benefits of some of these smarter building features. So I think the first thing is trying to just assemble some of this, collect some of these information and thoughts. And there's almost every time somebody took the conversation, they talked about an underlying technology that somebody may not even have thought of. So I think we have to kind of get that information out to the publics as to what the potential is of our industry.
I think this has been, I think you're right, Ken. I think this has been a good sort of brainstorming session to start this month, and sort of to identify the points. We've got some points, some proxies, as it were, and we need to put into some shape, and also in the next few weeks talk to some building owners that do understand data-centric building, sort of test these as hypothesis with them, and see which one resonates, and then package that up into a view that we can then do something with. And that's maybe another month's worth of things.
That's what I was going to, what's the outcome that we're hoping to get to here, right? We're trying to find ways to mature the market more quickly. Is that safe to say? Is that our goal?
I think the specific goal of this month is to really clearly understand what that mindset is of a building owner that has gone through some part of this journey. Obviously does not have everything sorted out, but has the questions about how and what to do. But these are people that have quite a bit of understanding as to why data-centric buildings is a good thing. So that's the objective this month. And then we obviously have to, assuming we get there, then we have to sort of figure out what the next step will be.
And it's safe to conclude that we have decided as a group that we need to focus on the ones who are getting it as opposed to
Yeah.
gripe about the ones who don't get it, right?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the thesis of this month.
Yep.
So
So-
with that,
Okay.
you want to wrap it, Steve? Go.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I've been taking a few notes. I'm just, we say a smart building can be accessed remotely from a mobile device. So we could have a series of statements, to Ken's point, that we could present to our audience, including hopefully building owners, and seeing if they agree with the statements. So that's an example of one, right?
Right.
That smart buildings will automatically notify me when something goes wrong on my mobile device, okay, or however you want to phrase it, right? Smart buildings let me start in a simple one, in a series of steps. I can take step one and mature it without losing any feature functionality. In other words, I can grow it incrementally over time, right? So smart buildings let me know how my energy is being used across my entire portfolio, so I can make the best decisions about procuring my utilities. So just thinking that if we came up with a series of statements like that, and then tested them against building owners, we would be able to validate whether we're on the right track or not.
I think that's great. I think that it's really good. So thank
I
you for
think
everybody.
just to Greg's point, though, I do think we need to get different spectrums of buildings. I don't want to keep defaulting into commercial buildings, right?
Right. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. And we could set, if we're not careful, we can set the bar really low or really high, what's the right level there. So.
Great. Well, thank you all, and
Okay.
thanks for the attendees and for all the comments and chat. And we'll get the video of this up tomorrow. Otherwise, have a great week and see you next week.
Okay.
Bye
There
all.
you go.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all. See ya.
Bye.